And I'm wondering, how many of you had breakfast this morning? No, not really. Okay, all right. Typically, when someone has a meal, the food is ingested, goes into the stomach, then passes down into the intestine. And when it reaches the late ileum, there is a peptide which falls in the family of what are called incretins. And glucagon, like peptide 1, is one of those incretins that is released by particular cells. Let's see, I believe they're called L cells into the hepatic portal circulation, which then goes into the systemic circulation and binds to receptors. And in terms of the pancreas, it inhibits beta cells, or actually it doesn't inhibit beta cells. The peptide stimulates beta cells to release insulin, and also promotes the generation of insulin, so that way insulin can be restored. And it inhibits alpha cells in the pancreas that are responsible for the release of glucagon. Can anyone tell me what glucagon is used for? What's the role of glucagon in the body? I mean, you're all in front of your computers. Why don't you take a moment and look it up, and you can tell me.
I believe it is the storage for glucose in the body.
That's right. It is a storage molecule for glucose. And so the role that glucagon plays is that while a person is fasting, that is between meals, as blood glucose falls, glucagon is released to help maintain a basal level of glucose when a person is not eating. So what this drug does, this analog of glucagon like peptide 1 does, is it stimulates the release of insulin and inhibits the release of glucagon. And so the overall effect in the blood would be what? In terms of serum glucose?
It will raise the glucose level in blood.
It would, if you increase insulin release, you're going to decrease glucose.
Yeah.
And if you inhibit glucagon release,
also decrease glucose.
It will tend to decrease. Although the thing that's interesting with semaglutide is that it will not decrease glucagon below resting levels. So it only inhibits increased levels of glucagon. So it's an interesting peptide. Now, when a person eats a meal, normally they are satiated, meaning they're no longer hungry, right? Some of us, like myself, continue to be hungry, but for most people, you eat a meal and you're satisfied. So, part of the effect of this drug is that these receptors for glucagon, for GLP-1 receptors, are located not just in the pancreas, but they're also located in the solitary tract of the nucleus, which means then that activation of these receptors in the nucleus produces satiety. The solitary tract nucleus in the brain, in the medulla of the brain, plays a major role in those kinds of very basic functions in terms of, are you hungry? Are you not hungry? Therefore, this drug, I'm going to use the brand name Ozempic, is prescribed not only for patients, its primary indication is for patients with type 2 diabetes, but it is also prescribed for weight loss, and it seems to be quite effective that way. So, at least in terms of basic function, this drug plays sort of a very critical role in terms of nutrition. Let's turn to the paper for just a moment. I'm going to do a share screen, so let's hold on. That's the one. So, as you can see here, this is the structure of the peptide, and you can see that it's essentially the drug. And you can see it's essentially a peptide chain that's been linked to a fatty acid with this linker here to this lysine in the 26th position. You notice here that if this is number 8 and this is number 7, in terms of GLP-1, 1 through 6 has been lopped off. So there is no 1 through 6. And then there's this substitution in the 8th position. What do you think that's about?
So Dr. Johnson, the paper mentioned that they kind of kept the entire molecule homologous to glucagon. But GLP glucagon-like peptide is basically they kept the entire chain look more than 90% close to glucagon, but they wanted to make some changes so that unlike glucagon, they do not get metabolized faster in the blood.
Right.
So that's why they made this change at position, like the amino acid at position 8, so as to so that the GLP-1 do not get metabolized by the peptidases.
Right. Very good. Just focusing on that, did anyone read or discover what the normal half-life of GLP-1 was? It's only like about a minute or two. So if they were going to alter this peptide, they had to do it in such a way so that way the catabolic enzyme that breaks it down would be impaired, and they did it through this substitution at position 8. And then what about linking it to this fatty acid? What's the role there? Anybody?
So, Dr. Johnson, I believe the fatty acid was to make sure the peptide kind of stays bound to albumin for long and is not excreted in the kidney. So in the bound form.
Well, number one, are peptides typically excreted in the kidney? The answer is no.
Not the peptide, but the breakdown product of.
Right. Right. And so what you're correct from the standpoint that this linking to the fatty acid facilitates the binding of the peptide to albumin, which is the most abundant peptide in the body or in the blood. It's the most abundant protein, circulating protein in the blood. And so once again, having this bound to albumin, as you suggest, Vivek, limits renal elimination, but it also it just essentially enhances blood concentrations beyond what it would otherwise be. Now, in this particular formulation, does anyone recall from the paper what the dosing is? It's well, let's back up a little bit. With a drug such as this, how would you expect it to be administered? Orally or parenterally? Parenterally, right. It's administered subcutaneously once a week. Can be. The thing that's interesting, I think, at least in the United States, this particular drug has a prescription cost of about $1,300 a month. So if insurance doesn't cover it, only the wealthy people can really use it. So backing up a little bit, this analog of GLP-1 binds to its receptor. Any thoughts on what kind of receptor GLP-1 is? And Vivek, why don't you give someone else a chance? Well, as I say, you're all plugged in. Why don't you look it up? Yeah, it's that's right. It's a G protein receptor. That's actually a GS. So what, based on things that you've learned both from me and from Dr. Kavanaugh, what's the second messenger system for GS proteins? And activation of GS activates adenyl cyclase, so you have an increase in cyclic AMP. And in this case, activation or increased cyclic AMP increases or activates protein kinase A. And then the ultimate is the opening of calcium channels in the beta cell. And the opening of the calcium channels in beta cell stimulates the release of insulin. So that's the actual mechanism for that, which is sort of interesting. I don't know, at least in terms of the solitary tract, what activation of the G protein receptor does in terms of signal transduction to induce satiety. So it's a different system. I have to confess, I'm really interested in this entire system and this drug. So this drug is now prescribed for type 2 diabetes, and it seems to be prescribed as an adjunct with other oral hypoglycemic agents like metformin. So they're given both together. A major advantage of this drug is that unlike many other hypoglycemic agents, it does not produce hypoglycemia as an adverse effect. So it is has some safety advantages over other types of oral anti-diabetic agents. A lot of this paper just essentially reviewed different clinical studies, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Just by way of review, can anyone tell me what a phase 1 study is? Clinical study.
So phase 1 is to assess the safety. So they use healthy volunteers and then with a small number of the people.
Right. That's right. So small studies, not even looking at efficacy, but just to determine a safety. Of course, all of this is done after preclinical studies to get a sense of safety in animals, typically one large animal species, one small animal species. And you can see in reading through this paper that there are a number of studies for both phase 1 and phase 2 studies. There's a whole bunch. Phase 2 studies can be looking at dosing, what's the most effective dose, as well as looking for some type of beneficial effect. And phase 2 studies, once again, tend to be relatively small. Here, the 700 subjects seems small. That seems pretty sizable to me. But considering they're looking at all the different doses, you need to have a fairly large number of participants in a phase 2 study. Have you guys had a chance to take a course in drug design
Not yet.
at all? Why do you think there needs to be so many subjects? Have you all had a chance to take a course in statistics? Yeah. And there's something called power in statistics, where you have to have a certain number of test subjects to rule out type 1 errors and type 2 errors. And type 1 error is a finding where there is a difference when there really isn't. But in particular, you need to have a sizable number of subjects to prevent type 2 errors, which is you claim at the end that there is no significant difference when there really is, and that's because the study lacks power. And so you need to have an adequate number of subjects. You can see here that in these phase 2 subjects, there's hundreds of participants. Let's see here. Now, when you go to phase 3 studies, these are really large studies with thousands of subjects. Here it's 1200, here it's 3200, 1200. And they're looking for effectiveness. And one of the things that's interesting is this drug was initially developed as a potential drug for treating type 2 diabetes, but they're doing all these additional studies, both taking a look at weight loss and then also taking a look, some of them were looking at effects on the cardiovascular system, looking at safety. Why would they be looking at cardiovascular effects, do you think? These are all like weight loss and this HbA1c. What is HbA1c measure?
It measures the average blood glucose level of a person. It's glycosylated hemoglobin.
Very good. That's true. And so in these studies, you can see that semaglutide was effective in all these studies in reducing A1C. You could see this is a scale of like 1 or 1.1. Does anyone know what the scale is in terms of measuring A1C?
So, Dr. Johnson, it is
Yes.
it is believed that in a normal adult, the HbA1c should be 6.5 or less.
Right. So, so you could say roughly between 1 and 10.
Right.
And so to have a drop of, let's say, 1, that's a 10% drop in A1C. So that is good. Let's see here. Another thing I want to look at this chart. You notice that for the different doses, in these studies, they have the semaglutide, and looking at this first one, 0.5 milligrams, and you see an A1C reduction of 1.45, and then there's this comparator. What's that about in terms of experimental design? What do you think?
So to show the effect, they should do something like a comparison, like a standard treatment or like a standard
Right.
medicine.
So you're exactly correct. So in terms of you using an anti-diabetic medication, an oral anti-diabetic medication, you want to see how semaglutide compares, and you can see it's fairly consistent. The other thing I noticed, at least in this table, if you look at the placebos, they're all negative, so they're all losing A1C to a much smaller degree, but it's all negative. What's going on there? Why Why are all the placebos negative? Well, of course, I think you've all probably heard of the placebo effect. Is the placebo effect real? Yeah, sure. It can be. Especially if you're giving a patient or a subject a drug saying this may cause a decrease in blood glucose. Just the anticipation here, you could actually see that from a physiologic, you could even get a physiologic response, although it is modest for sure. But here, as an example, in this study, it's 0.4, so that's like 4% drop, perhaps. Or about a third, or between a third and a half of what the drug treatment actually is. Now let's consider weight loss, and you can see most of the time you could see weight loss. Even with the placebo, like 1.5 kilograms. So that is about 3 pounds. Hey, that's not bad. But you could see upwards of upwards of 4.5 kilos. That's a substantial amount of weight loss. Or 6 kilos. That's over 10 pounds. So these are all impressive. There is, in fact, now formulations of higher doses of this drug that is prescribed specifically for weight loss. What were some of the adverse effects associated with this drug? Does anyone recall?
GI effects, nausea, vomiting.
Right. GI, and at least in part, that's been linked to slowing of gastric emptying, which then can lead to nausea. But that seems to go away over time. Here's just a figure showing the change in A1C with each one of these test drugs. I'm going to see if I can't turn this around. Hold on just a moment. Well, not much luck there. Oh, this has to do with cardiovascular effects. Boy, I really want to see if I can't rotate this. There we go. So, cardiovascular outcomes. And here you can see that in terms of various outcomes, let's see. First event occurrence. So you can see here 6.6 is smaller than 8.9. 3.8 is smaller than 4.8. So it appears that this drug has a protective effect, death from any cause, cardiovascular cause, and a marginal difference for cardiovascular death. So it seems to be a modest benefit. Why do you think that would be? From a mechanistic standpoint, why would this drug show some benefit? With the heart. I could think of a couple of ways. First, elevated blood glucose is associated with or is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, right? And so this could have to do with things such as circulating levels of lipids like LDL, right? And what things would cause an elevation in LDL? Oh, come on now. From an environmental standpoint, what causes an elevation in LDL?
Bad food habit, like if we eat.
Exactly. That's right. Very good. Yeah. High fat diet. And what is one of the effects that we've shown with this drug?
It reduces satiety.
Right.
Hunger. Suppress hunger.
Right. It enhances satiety so people aren't consuming as many calories. And if they're consuming less fat calories, then that could have a positive effect. There can be something else potentially involved, and this is what I'm thinking about in terms of the heart itself, which is that the heart is a muscle. It's always working, and it uses both fatty acids and glucose as energy source. And so if there's excess glucose, and this is just a guess on my part, it can have an impact on the metabolism of the myocardial muscle, which then could, in elevated glucose situations, have a negative impact on cardiac function. So that's another possibility. I don't know if they've done the study or not. It would be interesting to look histologically, post-mortem, at patients who died from myocardial infarctions who are diabetic versus non-diabetic hearts, and see if there's histological changes to the myocardium. You see, there's also effects on stroke. So you can see that there's a higher incidence of stroke in patients on placebo compared with semaglutide. It's especially in the SUSTAIN 6 study, it's more, it is much more interesting. So what about stroke? And I'm assuming that these are ischemic rather than hemorrhagic strokes. What causes ischemic strokes?
So, blood vessel stenosis or atherosclerosis.
Right. So stenosis or atherosclerotic plaques leading to thrombi, right? Blockages of cerebral blood vessels. And once again, type 2 diabetes is a risk factor for stroke. And so there, I think, sizable literature that elevations in blood glucose damages the endothelial lining of arteries, which then predisposes to the development of atherosclerotic plaques. And so this drug also seems to have some benefit. Now, just looking at the numbers here overall, in terms of the cardiovascular system, is this like waving a magic wand? I mean, how extensive do you think is the benefit?
So, Dr. Johnson, it appears diverse, like you also treating like the blood glucose levels. Then you're also improving, like at least you're showing some benefits on the lipid profile.
Right.
Like
secondary changes in diet. Yeah.
Lipid profile because of the results that we're seeing on like the cardiovascular benefit that we're seeing here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you were a patient, let's say with type 2 diabetes, would you spend $1,400 a month on a prescription for this? Only if you're a billionaire, I guess, or have very good insurance. Let's see if I can rotate this back. Whoops. I'm having trouble. and trying to figure out how to rotate this back. How did I get that happen here? Let's see. Maybe I'll be up here. Rotate counterclockwise. There we go. Okay. By the way, the company Novo Nordisk has come out with an oral formulation. The quintessential GLP-1 receptor agonist targeting diabetes. Huh. Here's an interesting statement. Wow. So apparently they're thinking it's good for this drug to be administered in patients during who are susceptible to COVID-19. And then hence, the final statement is, whoops, let me go back here. This drug has been proved to be an indispensable treatment option in the arsenal of physicians for better management of diabetes. Indispensable. Do you think the authors here are perhaps a little biased, just a tad? Indispensable. Let's see. I'm curious where the affiliations of these authors. Let's see. Oh, all right. I guess okay. Well, we don't have a way of noting whether any of these authors are in fact supported by Novo Nordisk, but I found it to be an interesting paper. This was published just last year, so it's relatively current. I know two people, or I've been told two people that I know have been taking this drug, and they find it very beneficial. I think they're taking it more for weight loss than for type 2 diabetes. And from what I've read and what I've heard, patients tend to lose weight for about 6 weeks and then they stabilize. Why do you think patients would tend to, at least in terms of weight loss, would tend to stabilize after a particular period of time?
I think
Any
this
thoughts?
drug,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this drug kind of make the people satire, I don't know, satire. They're appetite, so they don't they try to, I don't know, they try to not avoiding, but they can kind of like control their diet habit maybe.
Right.
So it might help their further gaining of the weight.
Well, I think there's some truth in that. My overall thinking, broadly speaking, not just about this drug, but in terms of absolutely critical physiologic functions, there is a level of redundancy. So, in terms of respiratory function, cardiovascular function, endocrine function, if one system gets disrupted, there are backup systems to maintain control. And my suspicion is that as someone loses weight, I mean, taking in energy is one of the key one of the key things that is necessary for someone to live. I mean, if someone doesn't take in calories, they're going to die. And so, if for one reason a person has a decrease of caloric intake, there will be alternative mechanisms by which there is an added stimulus to maintain or reverse the calorie loss, which is why, in terms of patients trying to lose weight who are obese, frequently they can go on diets or medications for a period of time and they all lose weight. But almost invariably, like 99.9%, after they lose the weight, they cannot sustain the weight loss and the weight comes back. And frequently they go back to whatever weight they had been plus additional weight. So there's always this cycle that tends to go on. And I suspect even with this drug, in terms of effects on the solitary nucleus of the brain producing satiety, it's not just that system. There are other systems that regulate appetite that then cause someone to become hungry, which then leads to seeking out sources of calories like pizza. It's hard to say no to pizza, right? Okay, I think we're going to stop here. I will get another review paper for next week, and I hope you all have a good weekend. All right. Any last thoughts from anybody?
One little thought, Dr. Johnson. As I was going through this paper, what I personally thought is the benefit they stated is common with other anti-diabetic drug as well. The one benefit was that the dosing, it's once a week, but the other cardiovascular effect on stroke, weight loss, I think almost all the anti-diabetic drug has same properties. So that was my personal thought about semaglutide.
Can you think of anything that distinguishes this drug then from other at least oral anti-diabetics? I'm thinking safety. The claim was that this drug will not result in hypoglycemia like many of the other oral anti-diabetic drugs if they inadvertently take them at the wrong time or the dose is not right. So this drug is a little bit safer. The other issue is, of course, do other anti-diabetic drugs induce satiety the way this one does? Do they?
No other antidiabetic drug claimed that they induce satiety. Yeah, that's an important point.
Right.
That
Yeah. The other thing is that, as I say, at least in terms of treating hyperglycemia, treating type 2 diabetes, the recommendation is that this is an adjunct, not a sole treatment, which I think is interesting. We'll see how this drug does. I was particularly impressed with the structure in terms of the manipulations they made to the basic peptide to allow it to have a substantial duration of action. And I just thought it was a very clever. Now, one of the things I think they mentioned, or one of the things that I read, is that this drug is synthesized using a recombinant DNA approach. And they didn't go into any detail on that, unless I missed it. But if they're using recombinant DNA, how would you think, from a manufacturing standpoint, how do they make it? Or are they making this in bacteria or yeast that they've modified the genome so it synthesizes this drug? I think it's just, and then after the fact, they have to do the modifications. It's just, must say I'm very impressed. Well, I'll find another paper for next Tuesday, and in the meantime, have a good week. Let's see, we can end this. Okay, so we'll stop the recording, and
Recording stopped.
I'll see you all on Tuesday. You all take care.
Good afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you.